Hey everyone, welcome back to Life on the Prairies, and I am Lindsay. So today we're going to actually be talking about the rural community immigration pilot that was just announced. And I'm going to be speaking to it from a community perspective, and it's going to be more involved. So I'm definitely going to do a future episode for those looking to apply under the rural community immigration program. However, today I want to focus more on speaking to the economic developers, to community futures staff, to chambers, and any others who are interested in applying. So on March 6th, the Honourable Mark Miller, he is the Minister of Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada, announced new pilots for rural and francophone minority communities. And really what the program is, it's creating permanent rural immigration. As we know, a lot of newcomers and immigrants generally go to huge cities such as Montreal, such as Toronto, such as Vancouver, and we're seeing a large influx going to cities like Saskatoon, which is amazing, Calgary, and even out east. However, there is still really a lack of actual newcomers, immigrants, moving to and remaining in rural communities throughout Canada. So today we're going to focus on the rural community immigration pilot and how it's going to launch in the fall of 2024. And further though, we're going to look back on it and we're going to say, okay, before it's delivered, what is it that the communities need to know when they're applying? Because really, the pilot is going to aim at having the program that addresses labor shortages, that helps local businesses find the workers they need. It's also going to provide a permanent residency pathway for newcomers who can help to overcome the critical labor shortages, and again, that want to live and work in our smaller communities. Now, if you know of immigration and you're either involved in it, through economic capacity, or you are an immigrant yourself, or you're somebody who's just been reading a lot about immigration lately, you will actually realize that this rural community immigration program is based off the RNIP, which is the Rural Northern Immigration Pilot. That's actually just been made permanent for this fall. And so it was such a huge success that the Government of Canada has designed a new one where it will actually allow more communities to be in charge of their permanent residency. So what does that mean? So the way how most often than not that immigration works is employers will nominate a person to work for them and say, hey, we really, really want this person to work for us. So we're going to nominate them. So they write a letter, and technically it's the provinces that do the nomination. And so then the provinces in turn review that applicant and say, okay, how well do they fit into our economy on a provincial level? Are they really needed? And they do a whole review. In Manitoba, for example, this process is taking about a year for it to happen. So by the time the employer gives the letter to the person after they're invited to apply to the provincial nomination, is taking about a year. Yeah, a year. So then once the person gets the nomination, then the person who's the newcomer has to then apply for permanent residency. So in all, you could very well be looking at an 18 month to 24 months, which is 2 years, immigration. And that is crazy, right? Because during that time, a lot of work permits will run out, your passports may expire, and there's so many just intricacies that people don't realize. And I often think even our provincial government doesn't realize that, right? So this program allows communities to skip the provincial nomination, and that is a good thing. It allows the communities to say, hey, we really like this worker. We want to nominate them. And so we're going to get into that in a little bit more detail. So it allows the community to nominate the prospective newcomer, and then that newcomer bypasses the province and they go directly to permanent residency, right? I always feel like I'm talking about monopoly. It's like you get to skip go, but that's really what it is. So you're cutting out the middleman, and that makes it more effective. And I also believe that there's a better buy-in from your community. So let's get into it. Now, I'm going to say this off the hop. Even though I'm a rural developer who has her regulated Canadian immigration license, I do not believe that every community should be applying for this, because I really feel it is a challenging application. And I also believe that communities should actually have a little bit of immigration history before they dive right into it, right? So before we go any further, let's just start off with what is expected, right? So first off, they're going to be looking for, they, meaning Immigration Canada, when you go to apply, the very first criteria that you have to overcome is population size and where the community is situated. So what does this mean? If you have a population under 50,000 and you are located at least 75 kilometers from a CMA, or you have a population under 200,000 and are basically, what we have is your scores 2.0 or higher for statistics index of remoteness. We have this link that I'm going to leave for you at the bottom of my show notes, or maybe on my webpage. But anyways, if you meet one of those two criteria, so you have your population's under 50,000 and is located 75 kilometers away from a CMA, or you have a population under 200,000 and your community scores 2.0 or higher on the statistic index of remoteness, then you are eligible. Now, that's simple enough, right? So there's going to be a lot of community. There's thousands and thousands. I think there's like 3,200 municipalities in all of Canada. So to other people, that may not seem like a lot, but for a rural prairie girl, to me, that's a lot of municipalities. So let's say your community, check. We meet that. Now we're going to have to look at your community's needs, right? So the economy of your community. And this is where you really have to be a community or region that was actually prepared and you have this information at your fingertips, right? So you have identified a shortage in a sector and occupations that cannot be filled by Canadians and permanent residents, and you have an economy that is growing overall, right? So they're going to be looking for players or communities that truly know what their shortages are. They can prove that their shortages cannot be filled by Canadians and permanent residents, and there's an overall growing economy. So this might automatically preclude some communities, because there are some communities where they might just not have that knowledge. They may not have those statistics built in terms of saying, okay, so we have 3 plumbing businesses and they're all short of workers. We have a greenhouse that can't fulfill workers, and there's a list of employers that are continually using labor market impact assessments or using the postgraduate worker pathway to attract and retain workers, right? So that's what they're going to be looking for, is how well you know your community's economy. Secondly, and I really think this is important, it's all important. So I actually think what Immigration Canada is actually asking is fair, which I tend to usually disagree with government, but I do have to say that this is fair ask. They're going to be asking you as well as, are you able to welcome and settle newcomers, right? So what is your capacity? So how is your healthcare? How is your housing and your educational facilities, right? What settlement organizations do you have? What are the services? How will you welcome these newcomers into your community, and what infrastructure do you have in place? And I actually had this conversation with my good friend Lori Matheson, and she runs a municipal consultancy agency out of Saskatchewan, and I think she's moved to Boissevain as well, but she also talks to me about, it's not just if your community wants immigrants, it's about the capacity and the infrastructure. And, after talking to her a couple of times, it's really got me thinking about communities really need to have the infrastructure as well, not just settlement organizations and volunteers saying that, hey, come here, and we'll get you into baseball, we'll do this, right? There's a lot more involved in that. Secondly, they're going to actually be looking for administrative experience and capacity. So you need to show that your community has funding. So a lot of people may not have realized this, is that there's no money that comes with this, right? So this program is not going to give you money for a staff person. So funding must come from external sources. or you must have probably an existing person on staff that's willing and able to understand how to deliver this initiative. You also have to show that, be it yourself or your partner, actually has experience with other multi-year initiatives, right? So, you might take a community futures who are really great at handling lots of programs, right? So they'll be able to say, hey, we've handled multi-year initiatives, so we can really take that on. You could also work with people that have experience with initiatives aimed at attracting, settling, or retaining newcomers, right? So that would be your settlement agencies, or maybe it's a group of volunteers. Okay, so then what do you need to know right now? The communities who will have the greatest chance will be those with the strongest applications. And it says it right on the call for proposals. So those people who are able to show the following: identified gaps that need to be filled in their economy, availability of infrastructure, services, and programs to settle newcomers, their experience with immigration programs, their capacity to partner with Immigration, Refugee, and Citizenship Canada, which is IRCC, and their commitment to fulfill the roles and responsibilities, right? Because as I said, there's no money coming with this. So if you have an existing staff person and you're going to assign he, she, they that role, then they have to understand that that's their roles and responsibilities. You're going to have a board that sits down, that comes together and reviews the employer's request to nominate the person that they might want to see stay with them. So there's a lot that goes into this. So your community has to be really prepared to take it all the way, right? Now it leads me to who can actually apply on behalf of your community, right? So if you are a volunteer sitting here listening to me talk, you might be like, wow, I really believe this is great for our community, but I don't know what organization to turn to. So as I just mentioned, a community futures organization, they're a regional organization and they deal with business and economic development. They could look at delivering it for you. Obviously, you would have to talk to them about this. Everyone I'm mentioning, you would have to go to yourself, like you would have to go and ask them and show them the whole proposal. It could be an independent or nonprofit economic development organization, a community organization with an independent board of directors made up of different community stakeholders, a chamber of commerce, a regional economic development organization who has a local presence in the community. We should also note, though, that people or communities in Quebec cannot apply. Neither can provincial organizations representing a province or territory. So those are the only two organizations and communities that can apply. Those in Quebec, and as well as any provincial or territory organization. So let's get a little deeper into this, right? So I keep touching on the roles of everyone and what's going to be expected, right? So I think first and foremost, the Economic Development Organization has to realize their responsibilities. So this is what Immigration, Refugee, and Citizenship Canada, IRCC, is asking of the Economic Development Organizations. They're saying, you will have to be able to promote the pilot to potential newcomers, employers, and designated learning institutions, build awareness of the pilot in your community or region, identify priority occupations and sectors facing labor shortages, designate employers, making sure that they are established within the community boundaries, have labor needs that align with the identified priority occupations or sectors, agree to support newcomer settlement and integration. Also, the Economic Development Organization, because I'm not done, needs to make sure that candidates' job offers are genuine, they're from a designated employer, and it's in a priority occupation, as we just mentioned. They also will have to recommend eligible candidates for permanent residence, build and maintain strong program integrity capacity to detect and deter fraud, ensure decision-making is fair as well as impartial, monitor and report on the results of the pilot in your community. So the person who, or community organization that is applying, your nonprofit, that is their roles and responsibilities. So that's a lot right there, right? So, and nobody's getting money for that. They are not getting dollars to hire a staff person or dollars for administration. They have to just raise their hand and say, hey, we believe in the good cause of this, so we're going to take it on. Now let's move on to employers, because at the end, I'm going to come back to the employers, but I need you to listen to what the employers need to do as well. because it's pretty important. So they need to apply to the nonprofit, or what we call the Economic Development Organization, for a designation. They also need to complete mandatory training. They need to recruit, assess, and hire the newcomers. They need to confirm the job requirements are aligned with the community labor market priorities, and they must also support the settlement and integration of newcomers. So it's not as simple as them just hiring someone. There's some training involved. They have to agree to certain aspects of the program as well. So the employers, they are taking on more as well. And now you may be asking, wow, what's Immigration Canada going to do? Well, here's what they're going to do. They will be responsible for onboarding, training, and providing ongoing support for communities, promoting the pilots, and they will ultimately decide if someone's going to get their permanent residence. So what a lot of people may not know in immigration, it's always the federal government who decides whether or not somebody becomes a PR. So they will assess the candidate with recommendations for permanent residence against their own eligibility criteria. So this is going to be human capital, such as language, education, work experience, and making final decisions, as I just mentioned, on all PR applications. And as well as, of course, they're going to be monitoring the outcomes of the pilot. In addition, before you apply to participate, you also need to get letters of support from each of these members in your community. So you must get a letter of support from a municipal leader, and this can be, as I said, in form of a mayor, a chair, a warden, or a reeve. You must also get letters of support from your funding sources or your partners. And this one might be a tricky one. You also need to get a local housing authority or a municipal housing committee. This confirms that your community has enough housing availability and affordable housing for newcomers and or initiatives to work towards affordable housing. You must also have a local settlement service provider organization. So I don't think that necessarily means you have to have one that's provincially sponsored or federally sponsored. You could probably have your own organization, even if it's a group of volunteers that have been doing it for years, right? And put them forward too. But as long as you actually have a local settlement service, because it's going to prove that you just didn't start your immigration strategy, that you've actually had immigrants come into your community for a while, right? There's no set template for the letters of support. They must endorse your community's application to participate in the pilot. So that's really all that that says about your community templates. If there is none, you have to design your own and just ensure that the essential information is in there, that the organization or the municipal leader, whoever it is, supports the initiative that you're applying for. So once Immigration Canada actually receives your completed application, they're going to review it at what we call a high level, right? So this is how they're going to weed a lot of people out. And for those who do not meet the following criteria, I believe automatically you'll be excluded, right? And so this is your responsibility. And they've kind of told you this in the CFP, the call for proposals. So you got to make sure all sections of the form are complete. Make sure all your supporting documents are included. Identify if your community is eligible to participate in the pilot and complete an assessment of your application. And of course, you can contact Immigration Canada for more information. So I don't want to go on and on about this application, but I do want to really stress some important key takeaways for what the government will be looking for, and as well as what you should consider before you even start having a bunch of evening meetings and calls to each other. So the first one is, it's going to be a simple yes or no. Did your community have an immigration track record of some regard? So if you just started a strategic plan and have like only one or two families, right, that you brought in, you got to think of something a little creative to win the bid over those who have maybe had a strategic plan for 20 years and who actually have a very high, adaptable, and very good program that's working, right? They're also going to be looking at, how well do you know your employers and their prospects and the education levels associated. So you're going to have to really take a deep dive into that and say, okay, so here's our employers in our community. Do we need a lot of skilled trades? Are we looking at a lot of healthcare workers? What is it that our community really needs, right? And you don't have a lot amount of time to figure this out, right? The biggest one, or one of the biggest ones to me, is housing. Now, how are you going to get housing for newcomers is really what they're going to want to know. I'm going to say that, go back to the episode 4, the one I just released, and there is a person who practices economic development that was telling us that there is no housing in Dauphin, right? That person said, you can't do this project, there's not enough housing. Well, after a lot of research and word of mouth, we were able to situate 65 families who all have their own homes. But I do say this, it took some time. Right? So we had some time. We started with 3 families and 12 families and we didn't have to prove ourselves to anyone, right? Because we were just a group of business owners. Like, we didn't have municipal funding or provincial funding or federal interest. We just did it on our own. So we were able to take our time and create our own kind of economic development way of doing it. But communities applying for this don't have the time, right? So you need to know your housing, and you need to be able to demonstrate that through a community housing support letter of some kind, right? You also need to be able to ensure that the newcomers or those who are relocating to your area have suitable and affordable housing, because they'll tell you one thing. Newcomers, like a Canadian, will leave a town if they do not have a job they are satisfied with, and or if they don't have suitable housing. So I really suggest that your community be sure that it has some housing that's affordable and very suitable for our newcomers. When I walk into a house, I always say, would I live here? And if I say yes, put it on the list. If I say no, then you take it off the list, right? Partners, this is another big one. No one's getting funding from this project. Not a dollar, right? You may be able to access it somewhere else, but this community funding or this community project that's going to be delivered through IRCC, they are not giving you money. So your community has to take on this additional responsibility in terms of identifying existing staff or accessing other funds, as I just said, from elsewhere to deliver the program. To me, it would be worth this if your community is strategic and can really access the newcomers that your community needs, right? So if you really believe you can get this off the ground, I truly believe that you should take existing resources such as staff and have them do it, right? But sorry, if you're only going to do what I call a half-assed job, then I would strongly suggest that you don't participate in this round and that you kind of look at what a winning community does and take notes, and then maybe you can reapply if a next round comes available. The last and most important thing that I want to touch on is your community, specifically your employers wanting to be a part of this program. Now let's go back over this. Remember, your employers are the ones that will make or break this program. So they got to apply to the EDO for designation. They themselves had to complete mandatory training. They had to recruit, assess, and hire the newcomers. Again, they have to confirm the job requirements that are aligned with those of the community labor market priorities. And they also have to assist to support the settlement and integration of newcomers. So if I was an economic development officer, chamber of commerce, or CF staff member, or whoever it is, I would definitely be doing a check with my employers before I even ventured down this road. As I just said, without your employers, this program will not be successful. It's just that simple. So there's so many things that also I want to say, but I know that sometimes just listening to me ramble on isn't the most interesting thing. However, I am going to be putting on a workshop on June 14th. It's going to be a webinar, and I'm going to go into a bit more detail, and I'd like to have a discussion with anyone who's interested in applying and go over some tips that I've seen through from other RNIPs and just being an immigration practitioner, what I think communities could also put in their proposals to have a winning edge. So if you want to register for my workshop, if you're a municipality, if you're an economic development officer, if you're a chamber of commerce, if you are Community Futures, I would love to have you participate. So just go to my show notes or log on to my webpage to register, and I would love to meet and chat with you all about this program and basically anything rural. Okay, so that's a wrap, my friends. Live rural, live well.
And I will roam these dusty country roads. Been searching all this time, and I think I'm almost home.